It started with the screech of tires. One moment, I was staring out the passenger window, half listening to my brother Justin brag about the college acceptance letters piling up on his desk. He was driving. Of course. He was always in control. The next moment, there was a violent jerk. The sound of metal screaming as it tore itself apart, and the spiderweb of cracks spreading across the windshield. I remember the smell of gasoline and something burning. I remember pain. Sharp and absolute. Then a deep, crushing blackness. When I finally woke up, it wasn't to a familiar voice or a gentle hand. It was to the sterile hum of fluorescent lights and the sharp, clean smell of antiseptic. My body felt like it didn't belong to me. A collection of aches and sharp stabs of agony held together by bandages. A nurse with kind eyes, Melissa, was checking my vitals. She smiled softly when she saw me stir. A few moments later, my parents walked in. My mother, Jessica, looked pristine as always, her hair perfectly in place. My father, David, just stood behind her, his eyes avoiding mine. There was no relief on their faces. No panic from parents who had almost lost their daughter. They just looked tired. Not from worry. From inconvenience. "She's awake," my mother said. Not to me, but to the doctor who followed them in. She didn't touch my hand. She didn't even look at me. The doctor gave me a reassuring smile. "You've been through a major trauma, Madison. You lost a kidney in the accident. But you're stable now. We saved you." My throat was dry. Sandpaper. I tried to form a word. My brother's name. Melissa. The nurse seemed to understand and gave me some ice chips. When I could finally whisper his name, my mother answered with a sigh. Like I'd asked a stupid question. "Justin's fine. A few scratches. That's all. The car is totaled." Of course. She glanced at her watch. The message was clear. He was fine. I was the problem. I was the one keeping them here. In this place that smelled of bleach and fear. In her eyes, the only real tragedy was the damage to our family's perfect image and a ruined luxury sedan. Justin walked away without a scar, while I was the wreckage left behind. That was the first cut. Deeper than any surgeon's scalpel. The days that followed were a blur of pain, medication, and solitude. My parents visited only when they had to. Their conversations short and transactional, focused on insurance paperwork and discharge timelines. Justin never came. Not once. I told myself it was guilt. That he couldn't face me after his reckless driving had nearly killed me. But a cold feeling in my gut knew it was something else. A deeper, older indifference that had been there my whole life. The feeling crystallized one afternoon as I drifted in and out of a morphine haze. A memory surfaced. Sharp and clear. I was 7. And I'd fallen from the big oak tree in our backyard, landing hard and snapping my arm. I remember screaming. Not just from the pain, but from the sight of the bone pushing against my skin. Justin, who had dared me to climb higher, ran inside. But when my parents came out, my mother's first words were, "Justin, are you all right? Did she pull you down with her?" They had checked his scraped knee before they even looked at my mangled arm. I was always the afterthought. He was the project. I was the collateral damage. That memory was a poison that seeped into the present, and it prepared me for the horror that was to come. It was late. The hospital silent, except for the rhythmic beeping of machines. I was awake. Pain keeping sleep at bay. When I heard hushed voices just outside my door, my mother, my father, and someone else. A man with a clinical, detached tone. "The legal fees for the street racing charge are $150,000, my father was saying, his voice thin with failure. "His scholarship is in jeopardy. His future." My mother cut him off. Her voice like ice. "There is a loophole. Since she is still a minor and medically incapacitated, parental consent for necessary procedures is absolute." The other man, the administrator, cleared his throat. "A kidney transplant for your son is hardly a necessary procedure for times her asterisk. He needs it," my mother said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "She's already damaged goods. 1 kidney. A scarred torso. What kind of future does she have? This would be a sacrifice. It would mean something. It would save the son who actually matters. I stopped breathing. The air turned to glass in my lungs. They weren't just neglecting me. They were harvesting me. Terror is a paralyzing thing. For a full minute, I was frozen. My mind screaming while my body lay perfectly still. They were planning to cut me open and take my remaining kidney to save my brother. To save his future. A future they were willing to buy with my life. But then, something inside me shifted. The terror didn't vanish. But it cooled, hardening into something else. It became a cold, sharp point of resolve. I wasn't going to be a sacrifice. I wasn't going to be their spare part. I was going to survive. I waited, my heart hammering against my ribs, until their footsteps faded down the hallway. The next morning, when Nurse Melissa came in to check my IV, I looked directly into her eyes. I couldn't speak. Not about this. The words were too monstrous. Instead, I just held her gaze and let a single tear roll down my cheek. Her kind expression flickered with concern. She had seen my parents. She had seen their coldness, their impatience. She had been the only person in this entire hospital who looked at me like a person. Not a problem. I reached out a trembling hand and squeezed hers, trying to pour all of my fear and desperation into that one small gesture. She understood. She didn't ask questions. She simply squeezed back and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. An alliance was forged in that silent moment. Later that day, she came back, telling me I had a visitor. It wasn't my family. It was a woman with a gentle face and a notepad, who introduced herself as a hospital social worker. Melissa had arranged it all. The social worker sat by my bed. Her voice soft. Melissa said you felt unsafe. I took a deep breath, the air rattling in my chest. I told her everything. I didn't cry. I was too empty for tears. In a flat, numb voice, I recounted the conversation I'd overheard. The $150,000. The legal loophole. My mother's words. The son who actually matters. I watched her face. She blinked once. Slowly. Then closed her notepad. She didn't need to hear any more. She believed me. For the first time since the crash, I wasn't alone. The system, once a faceless machine, was now kicking into gear to protect me. An official ethics complaint was filed against my parents and the administrator. A protective order was placed on my room. They couldn't touch me. The backlash was immediate and violent. My parents, discovering they had been locked out of my medical decisions, created a scene in the ICU waiting area. From my window, I watched my mother, her face, a mask of fury, point a shaking finger at the nurse's station, screaming that they were brainwashing her daughter. She belongs to us, she shrieked, before security calmly escorted them out. I didn't belong to them anymore. I belonged to myself. The news of the kidney girl spread quietly among the hospital staff. Some nurses looked at me with tears in their eyes. A doctor came in, placed a hand on my arm, and said, "You deserve a life lived on your own terms." Their small kindnesses were the glue that started to piece me back together. 3 weeks later, I was emancipated by a judge and discharged directly into the foster care system. It wasn't a fairy tale. The apartment was small, the bed lumpy, but it was mine. It was safe. Safe was everything. On my last day at the hospital, Melissa slipped an envelope into my hand. Inside was $500 in cash. "For your new beginning?" she whispered, hugging me tightly. That money was the foundation of my entire world. I finished high school online, worked nights at a dusty bookstore, and saved every single dollar. I refused any help that came with strings attached. I wanted to build a life that was completely, undeniably my own. The last tie to my old life was my name. Madison was the name of a girl who was disposable. I legally changed it to Avery. A name that felt strong. A name with no history. Years passed. I poured all my pain and resolve into my work. I got a job at a small biotech startup. And I rose fast. I wasn't just working for a paycheck. I was fighting for the girl in that hospital bed. By 26, I wasn't just working at the company. I was running it. As the CEO of Aura Therapeutics, I had built an empire from scratch. One afternoon, my assistant flagged a late submission for our prestigious Aura Progenitor Grant, a program I'd created to fund brilliant but struggling innovators. I glanced at the screen, and my blood ran cold. The application was from a failing startup founder, desperate for a lifeline. His name was Justin. Justin walked into the boardroom looking like a ghost of the golden boy he used to be. His suit was ill-fitting. His face was pale and haggard, and the arrogance in his eyes had been replaced by a raw, desperate hunger. He didn't recognize me. Of course not. He saw a woman in a position of power, the CEO of Aura Therapeutics, sitting at the head of a gleaming mahogany table. He saw everything he believed he was entitled to, but had never achieved. He had no idea he was looking at the sister he had left for dead. I let him begin his pitch. He stumbled through a presentation for a mediocre piece of medical software, his voice shaking. He talked about market forces, bad luck, and unforeseen obstacles. He painted himself as a victim of circumstance, a brilliant mind held back by a world that just didn't understand his vision. I listened in perfect silence, my hands steepled on the table. I let him finish his entire, desperate plea. Let the silence hang in the air for an uncomfortably long time after he was done. The power in that room was a physical thing, and it was all mine. He shifted his weight, sweating under the cool air conditioning. "So," he said, forcing a smile. "What do you think?" I leaned forward. "It's an interesting proposal." "Justin," I said, my voice even and calm. "But before we discuss your company, I'm more interested in your history. Tell me about your family." He looked confused. "My family, they're fine." "Why? No siblings?" I pressed gently. "I hear you had a sister." He flinched, a flicker of something dark crossing his face. I had a sister. We're not in touch. It was a long time ago. A car accident, wasn't it?" I continued, my voice as sharp and sterile as a scalpel. "You were driving. She was critically injured. Lost a kidney." His face went white. He stared at me, his eyes widening as the recognition finally dawned, a slow-motion wave of horror washing over him. "Madison," he whispered, the name sounding like a curse on his lips. Before I could even process it, an email from him landed in my inbox. The subject line was just one word: evidence. The body of the email contained only a link to a password-protected folder and a simple password. My heart hammered as I clicked the link and entered the code. The folder opened, revealing an arsenal. It was a collection of scanned documents and screenshots. Megan's real credit card statements. I swear. I let out a short, bitter laugh. "You didn't know, or you didn't want to know. You walked away from that crash with a few scratches while I was being cut open. You never visited. You never called. You never once asked if I was alive. You stood by and did nothing, because it benefited you. Your silence was your signature on my death warrant." He sank into a chair, his face in his hands. "They told me you were unstable. That you ran away?" "I didn't run," I said, standing and walking to the window, my back to him. "I was rescued from parents who were trying to harvest me for parts to pay for their golden boy's legal fees." I turned back to face him, my expression unyielding. "Now, let's talk about this grant. The Aura Progenitor Grant has a mission statement you clearly didn't bother to read. It was created to empower brilliant survivors, to give a voice to those who were told they had none, to fund the futures of people who have overcome unimaginable trauma. It is for victims, Justin, not for villains." His head snapped up, his eyes flashing with a spark of the old entitlement. "You can't do this. You're ruining my life over something that happened years ago." I tilted my head. "Ruin your life? You mean like you all tried to ruin mine, by stealing my body, my health, my future? No. I'm not ruining your life. I'm just refusing to save it." I pressed a button on the intercom. "Security. Please, escort Mr. Lieberwan. Evans out." He was speechless as two guards entered the room. As they led him away, a broken man, I felt nothing. No satisfaction. No anger. Just a profound, quiet peace. The war was finally over. After he was gone, I called my CFO. I'm establishing a new philanthropic fund. I told him. $2 million. I want to help young people escape abusive homes and build their own lives. My survival was never about revenge. It was about creating a legacy they could never touch. They thought that hospital room was the end of my story. They had no idea it was just the beginning. 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 It was just the beginning.